There is a painful misunderstanding that happens when someone with an avoidant attachment style creates distance after hurting someone they deeply care about. From the outside, it can look like indifference, rejection, or even a lack of love. But beneath the silence, a very different battle is often taking place. The distance isn't always about wanting to leave. Sometimes it's about not knowing how to stay. Sometimes the very person who caused the pain is struggling with guilt, shame, and emotions that feel too overwhelming to face directly. In this video, we're exploring why an avoidant person may pull away after hurting someone, why the silence can be misleading, and what may actually be happening beneath the surface. Understanding these patterns won't erase the pain, but it can reveal a truth that many people never get to see. When an avoidant person realizes that someone they care about has been hurt because of their actions, the emotional impact can be much deeper than most people imagine. From the outside, the response may seem confusing. Instead of moving closer, apologizing repeatedly, or doing everything possible to repair the damage, there may be silence, withdrawal, or an unexpected increase in emotional distance. To the person who was hurt, this reaction can feel cold, uncaring, or even cruel. It can create the impression that the relationship never truly mattered. But what often goes unseen is the intense emotional discomfort taking place beneath the surface. For many avoidant individuals, hurting someone they care about triggers something more painful than guilt alone. It awakens shame. Guilt says, "I did something wrong." Shame says, "There is something wrong with me." That distinction matters because shame has a way of making people want to hide rather than connect. Instead of feeling motivated to move toward the person they hurt, they may feel an overwhelming urge to escape the situation entirely. The moment they recognize the pain they've caused, a flood of uncomfortable emotions can begin to rise. Regret, disappointment, self-criticism, fear of judgment, and fear of rejection all start competing for attention. For someone who has spent much of their life suppressing difficult emotions, this emotional intensity can feel unbearable. Rather than processing those feelings openly, the instinct may be to create distance from anything that reminds them of the pain, including the relationship itself. This is one of the great paradoxes of avoidant behavior. The more significant the relationship is, the more emotionally exposed they may feel after making a mistake. The more they care, the more painful it becomes to face the consequences of their actions. As a result, they retreat into silence, not necessarily because they want to lose the connection, but because they don't know how to handle the emotional weight that comes with repairing it. Inside, there may be a constant replay of what happened. Conversations may be analyzed repeatedly. Different outcomes may be imagined. There may be a strong awareness of the hurt that was caused, but very little confidence in how to fix it. Every possible attempt at reconnection can feel risky. What if the apology isn't enough? What if the other person is still angry? What if reaching out only makes the situation worse? These fears can become so overwhelming that avoidance starts to feel safer than vulnerability. Unfortunately, the silence often creates exactly the opposite message of what is actually being felt. The person on the receiving end sees distance and assumes there is no care. They see withdrawal and assume there is no remorse. They experience abandonment when, internally, the avoidant person may be struggling with emotions they cannot easily express. This doesn't make the behavior harmless, and it doesn't erase the pain caused by the withdrawal. But it helps explain why someone can seem detached while carrying a great deal of emotional weight. What looks like indifference is often an attempt to escape overwhelming shame. What appears to be a lack of concern may actually be an inability to face painful emotions directly. And in many cases, the distance that follows isn't proof that the connection meant nothing. It is evidence that the emotions attached to it feel far more intense than they know how to manage. One of the most misunderstood reasons an avoidant person creates distance after hurting someone is the belief that any attempt to reconnect might only make the situation worse. While many people assume that reaching out is the obvious solution, an avoidant individual often sees the situation through a very different emotional lens. Instead of focusing on the possibility of repair, Attention becomes fixed on the possibility of causing even more damage. After a painful conflict or mistake, there is often an intense awareness that trust has been affected. The avoidant person may recognize the hurt, understand the disappointment, and know that emotions are running high. However, rather than feeling equipped to handle those emotions, they may feel completely overwhelmed by them. The idea of having a difficult conversation can seem intimidating. Every possible response is examined, questioned, and doubted before a single word is spoken. There may be thoughts such as, what if the apology isn't enough? What if the conversation turns into another argument? What if expressing feelings only makes the pain deeper? These fears create hesitation. That hesitation turns into delay, and over time, the delay can become complete withdrawal. What makes this pattern so difficult is that it is often rooted in a desire to avoid causing additional harm. From the outside, silence can look careless, but internally, there may be a genuine fear that saying the wrong thing will create even more hurt than already exists. The avoidant person may convince themselves that giving space is the most respectful choice, even when that space was never requested. This tendency is often connected to discomfort with emotional intensity. Conflict requires presence. Repair requires vulnerability. Healing requires conversations that are honest, emotional, and sometimes uncomfortable. For someone who naturally struggles with emotional exposure, these moments can feel overwhelming. The possibility of facing tears, disappointment, anger, or rejection can trigger a powerful urge to retreat. As time passes, another problem begins to develop. The longer the silence continues, the more pressure builds around breaking it. What might have been a simple conversation after a few days starts to feel impossible after a few weeks. The avoidant person becomes increasingly aware of the growing distance and may assume that the other person is now even more upset. This creates additional anxiety, which leads to more avoidance. A cycle begins to form. Fear creates silence. Silence creates more misunderstanding. Misunderstanding creates more fear. Each day that passes makes reaching out feel more difficult than the day before. There's also the possibility that the avoidant person secretly expects rejection. Deep down, they may believe that the relationship has already been damaged beyond repair. Rather than risk hearing confirmation of that fear, they choose not to reach out at all. Avoidance becomes a way to protect themselves from potential emotional pain, even though it also prevents the possibility of healing. The heartbreaking reality is that both people often suffer during this process. One person is left wondering why there has been no effort to repair the connection, while the other is trapped in a cycle of fear, uncertainty, and emotional paralysis. The desire to prevent additional harm ends up creating more hurt through absence and silence. In many cases, the distance is not a sign that the relationship is unimportant. It is the result of believing that any step forward carries the risk of making everything worse. The avoidant person becomes so focused on avoiding another mistake that they become unable to take the very actions that could begin the process of repair. After hurting someone they care about, an avoidant person is often faced with a situation that requires something they find deeply uncomfortable: emotional vulnerability. Repairing a relationship is rarely just about saying sorry. It usually involves honest conversations, emotional accountability, and a willingness to stay present while difficult feelings are expressed. For someone with avoidant tendencies, these moments can feel incredibly threatening, even when there is a genuine desire to make things right. Most people assume that emotional closeness becomes easier when a relationship is important, but for avoidant individuals, the opposite can sometimes be true. The deeper the connection, the more there is to lose. The more meaningful the relationship becomes, the more exposed they feel. When a mistake causes pain, that sense of exposure intensifies. Suddenly, the relationship is no longer operating in a comfortable emotional space. It demands openness, vulnerability, and emotional engagement at a level that can feel overwhelming. At the heart of this reaction is a fear of being seen at their most imperfect. When someone is hurt because of their actions, the avoidant person can become painfully aware of their flaws, mistakes, and shortcomings. They may worry that the other person now sees them differently, They may fear disappointment, criticism, or rejection. Even if those fears are never expressed out loud, they can become incredibly powerful internally. Because vulnerability feels unsafe, the natural instinct is often to create distance. Distance provides relief from the immediate pressure of emotional exposure. It creates a temporary sense of control in a situation that feels emotionally unpredictable. While stepping back may calm anxiety in the short term, it often creates greater problems in the relationship over time. The challenge is that healing requires exactly what avoidance tries to escape. It requires staying present during uncomfortable conversations. It requires listening to pain without immediately withdrawing from it. It requires tolerating feelings of guilt, sadness, embarrassment, and regret without running from them. These emotional experiences can feel overwhelming for someone who has spent years learning to suppress, minimize, or disconnect from difficult feelings. Many avoidant individuals did not develop these patterns intentionally. Often, emotional self-protection became a survival strategy long before the current relationship existed. Over time, distancing from emotional discomfort became automatic. As adults, that same strategy continues to appear whenever situations become emotionally intense. Even when there is love, care, and genuine concern, the nervous system may still react as though closeness itself is dangerous. This creates a painful contradiction. The avoidant person may desperately want the relationship to improve while simultaneously feeling an urge to escape the very conversations that could help repair it. Part of them wants connection. Another part wants protection. These competing desires create inner conflict that can be difficult to understand, even for the person experiencing it. Meanwhile, the person who was hurt often interprets the withdrawal as a lack of concern. The silence can feel like proof that the relationship doesn't matter, yet the reality may be very different. The distance is frequently a response to overwhelming vulnerability, rather than an absence of feelings. In fact, the stronger the emotional bond, the more intense that vulnerability may become. What appears from the outside as emotional detachment is often a struggle with emotional exposure. The relationship becomes a mirror, reflecting fears, insecurities, and painful emotions that the avoidant person would rather not face. Instead of moving toward the discomfort required for healing, the instinct is to move away from it. And in doing so, they create the very distance that both people may ultimately wish did not exist. One of the biggest misconceptions about avoidant behavior is the belief that silence means a lack of emotion. When an avoidant person creates distance after hurting someone, the absence of visible reactions can make it seem as though nothing is happening internally. There may be no emotional messages, no repeated attempts to explain, and no obvious signs of distress. From the outside, it can appear as if they have simply moved on. But what is visible on the surface often tells only a small part of the story. Many avoidant individuals become experts at hiding what they feel. Over time, they learn to keep emotions private, not only from others, but sometimes from themselves as well. This doesn't mean the emotions disappear. It simply means those emotions are processed in a way that is largely invisible to the people around them. When a relationship is damaged, there can be a great deal happening beneath the surface that never gets expressed openly. After causing pain, the mind may become a constant battleground. Conversations are replayed repeatedly. Specific words are analyzed over and over again. Different scenarios are imagined. There may be endless wondering about what should have been said, what could have been done differently, and whether the situation can still be repaired. These thoughts can continue long after the actual conflict has ended. At the same time, there may be a strong effort to maintain an appearance of calmness. Avoidant individuals often feel uncomfortable displaying emotional vulnerability. Showing distress can feel risky. Admitting how deeply something is affecting them can feel even riskier. As a result, they may appear composed while carrying a significant amount of emotional weight internally. This hidden struggle is often fueled by fear. There may be fear of rejection, fear of criticism, fear of confrontation, or fear of discovering that the relationship has been permanently damaged. Every possible outcome can feel threatening. Instead of addressing those fears directly, they may retreat into isolation, where they can think, analyze, and attempt to regain a sense of emotional control. Unfortunately, isolation rarely provides the clarity they are looking for. In many cases, it simply creates more overthinking. Questions begin to multiply. What if reaching out makes things worse? What if forgiveness is no longer possible? What if the other person no longer wants the relationship? The uncertainty can become exhausting, yet the fear of finding answers keeps them from taking action. What makes this internal battle particularly painful is that it often remains completely hidden. The person who was hurt sees distance and assumes there is no remorse. They see silence and assume there is no regret. Meanwhile, the avoidant person may be carrying guilt, sadness, and anxiety without expressing any of it. Both people end up trapped in separate experiences of pain, unable to fully see what the other is going through. There is also a tendency for avoidant individuals to believe they must handle everything alone. Rather than sharing their confusion or emotional struggle, they try to process it privately. They may convince themselves that discussing their feelings will only burden others or make the situation more complicated. As a result, they carry emotional stress in isolation, which often intensifies the very feelings they are trying to escape. The reality is that emotional silence should not automatically be mistaken for emotional emptiness. Just because feelings are not being expressed does not mean they are absent. In many cases, the strongest emotions exist behind the quietest behaviors. What looks like detachment can actually be an invisible struggle filled with regret, fear, self-criticism, and longing. The challenge is that these emotions remain hidden behind walls that were built to provide protection, even when those same walls prevent genuine connection and healing. One of the most painful realities of avoidant behavior is that the desire for reconnection and the fear of reconnection can exist at the same time. Many people assume that if someone truly wants to reconnect, they will simply reach out. They will send a message, make a call, or find a way to start the conversation. But for an avoidant person, wanting something emotionally and feeling capable of pursuing it are often two very different things. After hurting someone they care about, there may be a genuine wish to repair the relationship. The connection may still matter deeply. Thoughts about the other person may continue every day. There may be moments of missing them, wondering how they are doing, and imagining what it would feel like to make things right. Yet, despite these feelings, taking action can feel incredibly difficult. Part of the struggle comes from fear. Reaching out means stepping into uncertainty. It means risking a response that may not be positive. The avoidant person may worry about being ignored, rejected, criticized, or reminded of the pain they caused. Even if the desire to reconnect is strong, these fears can become strong enough to stop any movement forward. There is also the pressure of finding the perfect way to reconnect. A simple message may not feel sufficient. An apology may seem inadequate. Every possible approach may be analyzed repeatedly. They may spend days thinking about what to say, only to decide that nothing sounds right. Then the opportunity passes and the silence continues. The longer that silence lasts, the heavier it becomes. What might have felt like a manageable conversation after a few days can begin to feel overwhelming after a few weeks. As more time passes, the avoidant person becomes increasingly aware of the gap that has formed. They may start wondering whether it is now too late to reach out. Questions begin to fill their mind. What if the other person has moved on? What if they no longer want to hear from me? What if reaching out now only reopens old wounds? These fears create a cycle that is difficult to break. The fear of rejection leads to delay. The delay creates more distance. The increased distance creates even greater fear. Over time, the emotional barrier becomes larger and larger, even though it was never intentionally built. At the same time, there may be a hidden longing for the relationship to somehow repair itself. Part of the avoidant person may hope that circumstances will create an easier path back to connection. They may wish for a sign that reconnection is still welcome. They may wait for reassurance before taking any risk themselves. The problem is that both people can end up waiting, each hoping the other will make the first move. This internal conflict can be exhausting. On one side is the desire for closeness, understanding, and emotional relief. On the other side is the fear of vulnerability, disappointment, and rejection. Both forces pull in opposite directions, leaving the avoidant person stuck between action and inaction. To the outside world, this hesitation may look like a lack of interest. It may appear as though the relationship no longer matters. But in many cases, the opposite is true. The connection matters so much that the fear of losing it completely becomes overwhelming. Every possible attempt at reconnection feels emotionally risky, and that risk can lead to paralysis instead of progress. The tragedy is that while the avoidant person may spend weeks or months wanting to reconnect, the inability to overcome fear often keeps those feelings hidden. The desire remains real, but without action, it stays trapped beneath silence. What follows is a growing distance that neither side may have wanted, created not by a lack of care, but by the struggle to turn that care into courage. Perhaps the most important thing to understand about an avoidant person's distance is that it is often a defense mechanism rather than a final decision. When people experience withdrawal after a painful situation, the natural assumption is usually that the relationship is over or that the emotional connection no longer exists. Distance is often interpreted as a clear message, "I don't care anymore," or "I want to move on." But for many avoidant individuals, the reality is far more complicated than that. When emotions become overwhelming, the avoidant nervous system tends to prioritize safety over connection. This response is not usually a conscious choice. It is an automatic reaction that developed over time as a way of coping with emotional discomfort. Whenever situations involve intense feelings, conflict, vulnerability, or fear of rejection, the instinct to pull back can activate almost immediately. The goal is not necessarily to end the connection. The goal is to reduce emotional pressure. After hurting someone they care about, that emotional pressure can become incredibly intense. There may be guilt over the pain that was caused. There may be regret over things that were said or done. There may be fear about the future of the relationship and uncertainty about whether trust can ever be rebuilt. Facing all of these emotions at once can feel overwhelming. Instead of moving toward the discomfort, the avoidant person often moves away from it. The problem is that emotional distance provides temporary relief while creating long-term consequences. In the short term, stepping back may calm anxiety. It may reduce feelings of vulnerability and help create a sense of control. But the underlying emotions rarely disappear. They remain beneath the surface, often continuing to influence thoughts and feelings long after the withdrawal begins. Many avoidant individuals are not running from the relationship itself. They are running from the emotions attached to the relationship. This distinction is important because it helps explain why someone can create distance while still thinking about the connection every day. The attachment may still be present, the care may still be present, the longing may still be present. Yet the emotional challenges associated with addressing those feelings feel too overwhelming to face directly. This is why avoidant behavior can appear so contradictory. On one hand, there may be a genuine desire for closeness. On the other hand, there is a powerful need for emotional self-protection. These two forces often exist simultaneously. The desire for connection pulls in one direction, while fear and discomfort pull in the other. The result is a confusing pattern of withdrawal that can be difficult for both people to understand. What often goes unnoticed is that distance does not always bring peace to the avoidant person. While the withdrawal may create temporary emotional relief, it can also create loneliness, sadness, and a sense of loss. They may miss the connection they stepped away from. They may think about the relationship frequently. They may wish things had unfolded differently. Yet, because the defense mechanism remains active, taking steps toward reconnection can still feel incredibly difficult. Over time, this pattern can become frustrating even for the avoidant person. The very strategy that was designed to create emotional safety can begin to create emotional isolation. The walls that once offered protection start preventing the closeness they secretly desire. What began as a way to avoid pain ends up creating a different kind of pain altogether. This does not mean every avoidant person wants to return, or that every period of distance is temporary. Every situation is unique. However, it does mean that withdrawal should not automatically be viewed as proof that feelings have disappeared. In many cases, the distance reflects an internal struggle rather than a final choice. Beneath the silence, there may still be care. Beneath the absence, there may still be attachment. And beneath the walls of self-protection, there may still be a part that wishes connection felt as safe as distance.